It's our third week in Daniel. I know we've took a couple weeks off for Christmas, but we're going to look at Daniel one more time. And we enter in our last unit next week, and that'll be our last unit going through the Old Testament, then we'll be right in the New Testament. So we're coming down to the end here of at least the Old Testament. So, all right, Daniel chapter number 2. And before we really get going, I'm going to hand you out a worksheet to work through to start us off. So, Tita, can you take that, pass it around? Hopefully I have enough for everybody. And I want to do something a little different here this morning. I'm going to play Daniel 2 audio version so you can hear it out. It's done in kind of a dramatic form, so you hear the different voices and background stuff. So we'll start with that, and then we're going to use this, what you hear. I want you to kind of pay attention out of your Bible, what you hear, for answering some of the questions that we're going to work through out of Daniel chapter number 2. All right, here we go.
Daniel chapter 2. And in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. Then the king commanded to call the magicians, and the astrologers, and the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans, for to show the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said unto them,
I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream.
Then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac,
O king, live forever. Tell thy servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation.
The king answered and said to the Chaldeans,
The thing is gone from me. If ye will not make known unto me the dream with the interpretation thereof, ye shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. But if ye show the dream and the interpretation thereof, ye shall receive of me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and the interpretation thereof.
They answered again and said,
Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation of it.
The king answered and said,
I know of certainty that ye would gain the time, because ye see the thing is gone from me. But if ye will not make known unto me the dream, there is but one decree for you. For ye have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me till the time be changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that ye can show me the interpretation thereof.
The Chaldeans answered before the king and said,
There is not a man upon the earth that can show the king's matter. Therefore there is no king, Lord, nor ruler that asks such things of any magician, or astrologer, or Chaldean. And it is a rare thing that the king requireth, and there is none other that can show it before the king, except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh.
For this cause the king was angry and very furious, and commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. And the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they sought Daniel and his fellows to be slain. Then Daniel answered with counsel and wisdom to Aryak, the captain of the king's guard, which was gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Aryak, the king's captain,
Why is the decree so hasty from the king?
Then Aryak made the thing known to Daniel. Then Daniel went in and desired of the king that he would give him time, and that he would show the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house and made the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah his companions, that they would desire mercies of the God of heaven concerning this secret, that Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said,
Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changeth the times and the seasons. He removeth kings and setteth up kings. He giveth wisdom unto the wise, and knowledge to them that know understanding. He revealeth the deep and secret things. He knoweth what is in the darkness, and the light dwelleth with him. I thank thee and praise thee, O thou God of my fathers, who hast given me wisdom and might, and hast made known unto me now what we desired of thee. For thou hast now made known unto us the king's matter.
Therefore Daniel went in unto Aryak, whom the king had ordained to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus unto him,
Destroy not the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show unto the king the interpretation.
Then Aryak brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and said thus unto him,
I have found a man of the captives of Judah that will make known unto the king the interpretation.
The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar,
Art thou able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen, and the interpretation thereof?
Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said,
The secret which the king hath demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers show unto the king. But there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets, and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Thy dream and the visions of thy head upon thy bed are these. As for thee, O king, thy thoughts came into thy mind upon thy bed, what should come to pass hereafter. And he that revealeth secrets maketh known to thee what shall come to pass. But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any living, but for their sakes that shall make known the interpretation to the king, and that thou mightest know the thoughts of thy heart. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold. And after thee shall arise another kingdom, inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces, and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure.
Then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshipped Daniel, and commanded that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him. The king answered unto Daniel and said,
Of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods, and a Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal this secret.
Then the king made Daniel a great man, and gave him many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king.
Okay, so let's work our way through a little bit of what you just heard there. First off, the first question there, what attributes of God did Daniel praise him for? And that's specifically after the vision is given to him. Let me, maybe before we even get to the question, I read it, but let's get a little bit of the background. You understand what's going on here. Nebuchadnezzar's troubled with a dream, right? And being troubled with the dream, he gets his astrologers, wise men, all the people that are supposed to help him. And he says it twice that the thing is gone from him. And I don't know for sure how that's to be interpreted. There's kind of two different ways that people look at that. But my opinion is that he's saying that his dream is gone. He wakes up and it's gone. He knows he had a troubling dream, but every time he wakes up, it leaves. Anybody ever had a dream like that? You can't remember it the moment you wake up? That's funny how that works. But that's probably what he's talking about. But what are the wise men keep trying to insist he do? Tell the dream, and then we can give you the interpretation. And Nebuchadnezzar basically says, if you can't give me the dream, then I know you can't give me the interpretation. It's sort of like a way of saying, you know, you guys have been telling stories based off or making up the stories as you go along here every time I need information. I want to see if you can prove that you really are people who have contact with the gods. And at one point they admitted they didn't, right? They said this is something only God can do, and God doesn't have anything, or the gods don't have any communion with flesh. So they basically admitted they're not able to do this, and they're really not what they are. And so what does Nebuchadnezzar want to do with them? Destroy all the wise men, including one that hasn't been even invited into the council. Who was that? Daniel and his three buddies. And so that's where Daniel comes into play, and he asked for a stay of time, if you will, so he could have the time to be able to seek his God and get the answer. And he does get the answer, and this first question comes to the point when he's given the vision or the answer. He and the three friends of his are given this vision. This is how Daniel responds. And it's found in verses 20 through 23. And so it asks the question, what are the attributes of God that Daniel lays out? So if you can see some of those, point them out. What are they? When we talk about attributes, we're talking about qualities of God, what God is like, who he is, what he does, his nature. See if you got any of those. Which one? Omniscient. What does omniscient mean? He knows everything. And then look at verse 22. You can see that one there, right? It says, he revealeth the deep and the secret things. He knoweth what is in the darkness, and the light dwelleth with him. Okay, so he knows all things. All right? All right, any others? All the way through 20 through 23. Omnipotent. Where do we see that one at? Yeah, in verse 20, he He talks about his might. Omnipotence means he has all power, okay? And this is a little bit of his power being put on display, at least, okay? He doesn't talk about that here. That's a good attribute, but that's not one he talks about, okay? Any others? Keep reading there. See, there's a few words he actually straightly uses that he talks about being wise. Okay, verse 20, look, it says, Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. He is wise. Okay, what about 21? There's a good one here that's used. And he changeth the times and seasons. He removeth kings and setteth up kings. He giveth wisdom unto the wise. That removing kings and setting up kings, what's that talking about? It's a big attribute that all of you should know. Sovereign. He's in control of what goes on. He's over all the kings. He is not subjected to the kings. He is the master over them. Okay? Any others? Gracious. Who said gracious? Okay, where do you see that? 23. Okay, let's read it. I thank thee and praise thee, O God of my fathers, who hast given me wisdom and might, and hast made known to me now what we desired of thee, for thou hast made known unto us the king's matter. Would we say that fits into a bit of graciousness? Meeting a need in a time of desperation? Okay, that does fit in there. Okay, so those are some of the attributes of God. There's one other one that maybe you didn't see. It talks about him being eternal. He says, look what he says in verse 20, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever. That's a reference to his eternal nature. That's an attribute, right? God doesn't have a beginning and he doesn't have an end. Okay. That'd be the wisdom one, yeah. Okay. So those are a few of them, yes. Light dwelleth with him. That might be a reference to that. I think it more deals with that he has all knowledge, that there's nothing hidden from him, that even darkness is light to him. I think that's the reference to what that's meaning. Even though that you're right, and that is an attribute of God, that he is holy. Merciful would fit close to gracious. Okay. Yeah. So we get a few of those there. Okay. Now, number 2. To whom did Daniel attribute his wisdom and understanding when he's before the king? If you want to look at that, if you can't figure it out, which I think it's pretty easy, that's Daniel 2:27 through 30. Who did he attribute his wisdom to? God. There you go. You didn't even have to look that one up, did you? By the way, did you notice there Nebuchadnezzar's praising Daniel for figuring this out, and Daniel from the very beginning is saying, I didn't figure this out. This comes from God. He used this as a platform to exalt his God with this opportunity. And that really does set us up as something that maybe we need to follow as a model when we have an opportunity to serve the Lord in a way that we remember that it wasn't us that even put ourselves in that place. And it's he who works through us, and exalt him through it. Number 3. Now, the reference is a little off here. It's Daniel 2:36 to 38, not Daniel 2:40. But it says, what did the golden head represent? Nebuchadnezzar, and more broadly, what does it represent? Babylon, the kingdom of Babylon, okay? All right. What did the arms and the chest of silver represent? And it gives you a reference. It's not in Daniel 2. It gives in Daniel chapter 5, verse 28. And before you look there, the reason why they give you that is because it doesn't directly tell you in chapter 2 what that second part of the statue represents. It just says it actually just says it's a kingdom inferior to you. So the only way to know that is to maybe find it somewhere else. So Daniel chapter 5, verse 28 gives us a reference to that. So in another vision that's shown. So why don't you look it up real quick? Why don't you read the verse for us? Okay, so this is at the very end of Babylon, After Babylon passes off the scene, another kingdom is going to take over. And what kingdom is it? The Medes and the Persians, or it says it's called the Medo-Persian Empire. Okay? All right, number 5. Again, this is one that's going to give you a reference that's found somewhere else because it doesn't tell us here. But if you put the connections together, you'll realize this is another kingdom. What did the midsection of brass represent? And again, Daniel 8:20 through 21. You can find it there. Did you find it already? You're ahead of everybody. You cheated. What is it? Why don't you go ahead and read it for us? Okay, so that's that one kingdom. What's the kingdom that comes after? Keep going. Keep going. Okay, the king of Grecia. The rough goat is the king of Grecia. So what do we know this next kingdom represents? Greece or Macedonia is also what it's called. And the king, the first king with the big horn there, is who? If you know the history a little bit. That's Alexander the Great. Okay? Think about that. You're getting history that's given in advance. Isn't that amazing? That's being given in advance there in the Bible. This stuff doesn't play out for a few hundred years. And yet it's being played out like this, or being described this way. Then you come to a fourth kingdom, and the fourth kingdom is never mentioned anywhere specifically by name in any of the parts of the book of Daniel. But if you know a little bit of history, what kingdom comes after the Greek Empire? Rome does. Okay? But the most is talked about of that fourth kingdom, isn't it, in this vision? Did you notice what it goes on and it talks about it being? Talking about the nature of iron and all of that. What's it saying about the nature of this kingdom? Huh? It's going to be a very strong and harsh. It says that the iron is used to break in pieces, and this is the idea of what this kingdom is going to be like. It's going to be a very harsh, abusive kingdom when it comes on the scene. A later vision that's given to us in Daniel describes this kingdom. If you see, there's a sea, and you have the lion that flies that comes out, and then you have a bear that rises up that comes out, and then you have a leopard that comes out, and then you have, they don't even describe it as an animal, they just describe it as a beast that comes out, and it talks about it doing some of the same things, being a very ferocious type of creature. And that's what this last kingdom is going to represent, is the Roman Empire. It is not a nice kingdom at all in its nature. Now, let's go down back to the vision. Look at Daniel chapter 2, verse 41 to 43. And it talks about, number 7, what did the feet and the clay, or the feet of clay and iron represent? Go and look at that and see if you can figure that out a little bit. Passage kind of gives you some clues there. What's it represent? Division in the empire, or disunification in the empire? What else? Strength and weakness in the empire. It has the strength of iron, yet it is also very vulnerable and weak. Okay? And why is it in that condition? What's he say here? And it's maybe hard to figure out what exactly he means here, but what is the reason why it is weak? Yeah, that's far into the future. You're looking at 400 years after the time of this, at least at the time of where this vision, I think, is finding its fulfillment in. But look what it says here in verse number 43. It says, "Whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay." What does that mean? What do you think it means to be mingling with the seed of men? Oh, what's your thought? Well, that would be sort of the answer here. Yeah, they make, the idea is that they make agreements with each other, but they don't keep their agreements with each other. They line up and they hook up with different nations and different groups of people, but they are not unified with each other. And he says it's much like iron cannot be mixed with clay. It won't join. It doesn't seam together. It doesn't hold together. And that's the idea, is that there's no unity here. And even though they're trying to have it, the fact they got so many people, so many nations being brought together under one empire, it doesn't work. And there's that division. That's part of the reason why you had the Pax Romana, or the Roman peace that was instilled, and it was a forced peace that was put upon the Roman Empire because of the fact there was so much fighting going on there was so much civil war breaking out within the Roman Empire all the time through its history. And even though it went on for a time where there was that peace, as soon as Caesar Augustus was gone, that started up again. So that kind of a warfare kept breaking out. So that's the idea here of the fact that they were just completely disunified. Okay? Yeah, we haven't got to that part yet. We're still working on just the fact of the iron and the clay for a moment. Now, go ahead and say what you wanted to say, though. Sorry, because I'm going to jump ahead to the next question. Yeah, partly strong, partly broken. Yeah, that's the idea. And by the way, history shows out that over time, Rome eventually dissolves on its own. It breaks apart because of this reason. They were so disunified, and people saw the division in the empire, and literally the kingdom was taken over by others. Yeah. No, we're getting into a whole new Sunday school lesson on that part. Yeah, yeah. I think we're looking at something that's representing something that happens at the time when Christ comes, because that's where the next part of the vision goes. Look at what it says in verse 44 and 45, and it talks about what does the stone represent. It says, "And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and a kingdom which shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever." And I think that's a reference to Jesus Christ coming and bringing the kingdom of God. And there's a lot of people that want to throw that at the very end of time. I don't think you have a liberty to do that. I believe he's talking about in the time of the Roman empires when the kingdom of God would be established. And in fact, you might remember Jesus said the kingdom of God is among you. And it was the very fact that he was there, and he described the kingdom as starting small and spreading out and filling the earth, which is exactly how the vision plays out, like a mustard seed that would fill the garden with a tree or a big bush. And so here you have this stone. What does it represent then? At least in this sense, what does it represent? Regardless of the timing, what does it represent? Well, God's kingdom, and God's kingdom is going to do what with all kingdoms? Put them all down. Yeah, every other kingdom is going to be put down, and this is the final kingdom. And what does that stone become? A mountain that fills the entire earth. Okay, that's how the vision plays out. So in this sense, one of the things it does give us a little bit of understanding of what the nature of this kingdom is that this kingdom is responsible for all the other kingdoms' power. Do you see that? Because you know how the kingdoms actually, they didn't destroy the kingdoms, they took over kingdoms. So Babylon itself took over a kingdom. It took over the Assyrian kingdom. The Assyrian, then you have the Babylonian, then you have the Medes and the Persians that basically just take over the Babylonian kingdom. The Babylonian kingdom, the Medo-Persian kingdom is taken over by the Greek kingdom, by Alexander the Great and his emperor or his generals, and then the Roman Empire does the same thing. And so that's why they're always called nations. These kingdoms are full of nations because you have all these different people groups that are represented under those kingdoms that have been conquered over these periods of time. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the kingdoms completely disappear. It just means that now one is going to take over all of those kingdoms. Who is the one that takes over all those kingdoms? Jesus Christ, or the one who has represented the King of all kings, right? Does that make sense? Now, he's still ruling, isn't he? The Bible says in Philippians 2, he's been given a name which is above every name, and that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow, every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. He sits on the right hand of the throne of God, it tells us, and he's putting down all his enemies under his feet. How's he doing that, by the way? He does it through the means of giving the gospel, and he will finally do it one way. How? When he comes again in judgment. Those are the two means by which he is putting all under his feet. Okay? So that's the vision. Now, what's the purpose of the vision? Let's go back now to the last question here. Thinking back to the blessing Israel, or blessing Jacob gave to Judah in Genesis 49, 8 through 12, and this is talking about the scepter not departing from Judah, if you're familiar with that. If you want to look that up, we can read that real quick. What idea is repeated or confirmed through this dream? Does someone want to read that passage in Genesis 49, 8 to 12? This is when Jacob is blessing the 12 sons, and he's kind of prophetically speaking over them. Anybody want to read that? Anybody? Okay, Melissa? Okay, so there's kind of a veiled reference to not only the fact that a kingdom will come out of the people of Judah, but one that's referred to as Shiloh will be the one that brings peace and gathering all his people to himself. Who is that? Yeah, Christ. Okay, and how does that fit then? Going back to what we see in this vision, how does that fit with what Jacob said? Connects with the stone, yeah, the kingdom. Think about this. One of the things that has probably been a concern of any of the Jews that have been taken into captivity is that all those promises have failed, right? Because the promise came down to our people are going to have the Messiah come through them. Well, now they're all in captivity. And then specifically, Judah is going to be the one that the line goes through. But they're in captivity. And what God is saying is that even though they're in captivity, the plan has not come to an end. That God is still going to bring this kingdom into the world. And it does come through the line of Judah, doesn't it? Because if we know a little bit of the history, we see that when they do come back, the line is still there. The people that are now called in the line of Zerubbabel, which is in the Judah line, keep going on until the time in which this king comes, Jesus Christ. And then the line comes to an end at the judgment, at the end of the Roman conquest. If you remember, whenever Rome comes in and destroys really Jerusalem and destroys a lot of the people, the lines pretty much come to an end, but there's really no need for the line anymore, is there? Why? Because the king's already here, and the king still sits on his throne. He doesn't need anyone else to come out of his line. Does that make sense? Okay. So there's your Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Now, this isn't meant to be a whole eschatology lesson. This is just what you see in here. Now, let's go to Daniel 5. We're going to see some more. Now, this isn't the only vision that we have given. Nebuchadnezzar has another dream that's very similar to this one, but it's it's different in the sense that it's talking about his coming fall. We're not going to look at that. We're going to look at how God is going to take down another king of Babylon. And this, by the way, is if I remember right, the great-grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, or grandson, I can't remember. I think it's great-grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. And this is Belshazzar that we're going to look at, Daniel chapter number 5. And Belshazzar has not learned from the humiliation that has been brought upon Nebuchadnezzar. Does anybody remember what happened to Nebuchadnezzar? I think we talked about it in one of the other Daniel lessons at one point in his reign. Yeah, he was driven out of his kingdom for a time, and he ends up learning that God rules in the kingdom of men, and that he gives it to whomever he wants, and that he deserves honor for being who he is. And Nebuchadnezzar had not been giving that honor to God. And so he learned the lesson, didn't he? And his kingdom was restored back to him amazingly. And so Daniel 5 jumps way into the history, way into the future, probably, I would say, at least 30, 40, 50 years into the future, because we're right at the end of the 70-year mark. Okay? Because remember, you say, why is 70 so important? It's how long Judah's going to be in captivity. And when chapter 5 comes to an end, the 70 years have reached their point. Okay? So we're looking at Daniel's been in captivity by this chapter now at least for 70 years. Okay? All right, so let's go to Daniel 5. Do you want me to play the audio, or do people want to read? Can I get enough readers? It's 31 verses. Should I take a vote? Who wants to read? Who wants to listen to the audio? Easier? Okay. All right, I'll give you the audio version. You like the audio version? No one as good as drama as this one is, huh? Okay, here we go. Daniel 5.
Daniel chapter 5. Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, whilst he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem, that the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines might drink therein. Then they brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple of the house of God, which was at Jerusalem, and the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines drank in them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and of silver, of brass, of iron, of wood, and of stone. In the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand, and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Then the king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against another. The king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. And the king spake and said to the wise men of Babylon,
Whosoever shall read this writing and show me the interpretation thereof shall be clothed with scarlet and have a chain of gold about his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom.
Then came in all the king's wise men, but they could not read the writing, nor make known to the king the interpretation thereof. Then was King Belshazzar greatly troubled, and his countenance was changed in him, and his lords were astonished. Now the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet house. And the queen spake and said,
O king, live forever. Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed. There is a man in thy kingdom, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And in the days of thy father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was found in him, whom the king Nebuchadnezzar, thy father the king, I I say thy father, made master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. Forasmuch as an excellent spirit, and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams, and showing of hard sentences, and dissolving of doubts, were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation.
Then was Daniel brought in before the king. And the king spake and said unto Daniel,
Art thou that Daniel, which art of the children of the captivity of Judah, whom the king my father brought out of Jewry? I have even heard of thee, that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. And now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing, and make known unto me the interpretation thereof. But they could not show the interpretation of the thing. And I have heard of thee, that thou canst make interpretations, and dissolve doubts. Now if thou canst read the writing, and make known to me the interpretation thereof, thou shalt be clothed with scarlet, and have a chain of gold about thy neck, and shalt be the third ruler in the kingdom.
Then Daniel answered and said before the king,
Let thy gifts be to thyself, and give thy rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing unto the king, and make known to him the interpretation. O thou king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom, and majesty, and glory, and honor. And for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would he slew, and whom he would he kept alive, and whom he would he set up, and whom he would he put down. But when his heart was lifted up, and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. And he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild asses. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointeth over it whomsoever he will. And thou, his son, O Belshazzar, hast not humbled thine heart, though thou knewest all this, but hast lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house before thee, and thou and thy lords, thy wives, and thy concubines have drunk wine in them. And thou hast praised the gods of silver and gold, of brass, iron, wood, and stone, which see not, nor hear, nor know. And the God in whose hand thy breath is, and whose are all thy ways, hast thou not glorified. Then was the part of the hand sent from him, and this writing was written. And this is the writing that was written: Mina, Mina, Tekel, Upharsin. This is the interpretation of the thing. Mina, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. Pyrrhus, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians.
Then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet, and put a chain of gold about his neck, and made a proclamation concerning him, that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. In that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain. And Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old.
Okay. So let's go over some of that. There might be some questions that you may have if you understood what he was saying there. What was Belshazzar, this king here, doing prior to the handwriting on the wall? It was a party, but it was a party that was meant to do what? Really kind of had two purposes. To exalt the gods that he represented, or he said he worshipped, and at the same time to do what with the God of Israel? To make a mockery of it. Remember, because that's what he did. He brought in the brought in the vessels that came out of the temple that Nebuchadnezzar had taken years before, and he's drinking out of it, and he's got all his wives and his concubines doing the same. And it's all just a mockery of this God. And then whenever Belshazzar sees the handwriting on the wall, how does he respond? Yeah, I like it that the Bible it almost is humorous in the way the Bible said it. Said that his joints were loosed and his knees were smiting against each other. That he was terrified when he saw what was happening. And you know, why would he be terrified? Nobody attached to it. Do you think there might have been an underlying conscience that was going on that was also creating that terror? That he knew what he was doing was wrong? In my mind, I think that's partly what's going on as well. I'm not saying that that's the only reason why he did it. And it could be that it was just a strange thing. But strange things don't always make people that fearful. You have to disagree? Okay. I'm guessing, though, most likely it's a matter of conscience. It's my opinion on that one. Yeah, because that's what Daniel refers to later. All right, so the first thing he does is like all the other kings in every other vision, or at least what Nebuchadnezzar's done in 2 of his previous visions. What does the king immediately call out for? Where's all the wise men and the soothsayers? And like the last 2 visions that we've seen, none of the wise men can figure out the answer for the problem, right? If you know the 2 visions, you have the one of the statue and the one of the tree that's cut down. And both have the same result. And now this one with Belshazzar, nobody can figure out what this means. So how does Belshazzar address Daniel whenever Daniel's finally brought in? He says something about him, verse 13 and 14. Yeah, how does he refer to Daniel? Yeah, he refers to him as having the spirit of the gods in him. That's sort of a pagan way of saying that he is very wise. And he doesn't acknowledge the God of Israel. He just acknowledges this guy's he has connection to one of the many gods in the world, right? It's kind of a pagan way of looking at him. Does Daniel have nice things to say to the king? Daniel at this point, it's like he doesn't even care if he's insulting the king at all, does he? He's an old man that's had enough of it, right? Maybe that's it. But his response to Belshazzar is basically, keep your gifts. I don't want them. Did you notice there that he said he was going to make him 3rd ruler in the kingdom? Does anybody know why that's mentioned and not 2nd ruler or whatever, or co-ruler? There were already 2 rulers. According to history, the Belshazzar is actually the king that rules in the stead of his father, who his father was outside of Babylon, actually fighting an army that was working its way toward Babylon. Anybody know who that army was? Huh? No, they're not in existence yet. The Medes and the Persians. It was actually the Medes at that time. So that's one of the references. Now, Daniel basically says, you knew about your father Nebuchadnezzar. And I told you, he's like a great-grandfather. The word grandfather is never found in the Bible. It's just referred to as father. But it's one of his fathers in the past. And he says, you knew about how your father had been humbled. That story wasn't just kept to him and nobody else knew it. It was spread all over the whole kingdom, and even you know about it. How the God of everything, the God of creation, humbled your father, and he knew by the end that God rules in the kingdom of men. You knew this, and yet you have made an opportunity to mock that God, and you're doing it right here. I mean, I don't know what that king, if the king doesn't even stop Daniel from basically preaching at him and telling him he's wrong in what he's doing. And then he goes on and he begins to interpret the words. You got many, tekel, and upharsin that are the words that are on the wall. Many, what does it mean? Yeah, your kingdom has been numbered. What is that a way of saying? It's reached its end. It's reached its end. The amount of days that you were going to be king has come to its end. Today is your last day. Then tekel, what does that mean? Yeah, it's been weighed and found wanting. What does that mean? The balance is due. You are short. Yeah, you have it's a time to pay, to set the scales right. Okay? And then you see the word upharsin. It doesn't use that word. It uses the word Perez. Anybody have an idea why he changes it to Perez as opposed to upharsin? Any clues? No. It may be, but that's not why the word is used that way. The word Perez, upharsin is a plural word. Perez is a singular word of that. And it's just the way that the word works. The word, if you want to take it to plural, it's upharsin. If you want to take it to singular, it is Perez. And so he takes it in the single word, and the word means to be what? Divided. Your kingdom is going to be divided and given to two kingdoms. Which kingdoms? Medes and Persians. Medes and Persians. The Babylonian time has come to its end. And what do we find out? That very night, what happens? The Babylon falls. Now, it's interesting. History tells us kind of an amazing story of what they think actually happened, how Babylon fell. The Medes and the Persians were outside, specifically the Medes leading at the time, were outside or working their way to try to take over Babylon, and they hadn't made it. But there's this river that flows through Babylon. Anybody know what the river is? The Euphrates River that flows through Babylon. And what is said is that Darius the Mede had actually rechanneled the river away from Babylon so that whenever they would finally connect the river, that channel to the river would stop flowing through the city, and said that they just came right up on the bed, the bottom of the river, up into the city and took over when everybody was drunk. And according to the history is that there wasn't even a shot fired, in the sense of the fact that they had to do any fighting to gain entry into the city, because everybody was in this kind of drunken fest in Babylon going on at this time. While they were on the edge of their own destruction, that's what they were doing. So an amazing way that God took down the kingdom. I would love to be able to do the next part of the lesson, but we have run out of time. We're going to look at Daniel 6. This is the lion's den one. We're going to have to look at that at another time. I'll have to do that later. But let me give you some questions as we come to a conclusion for today. Number one, this one isn't going to fit necessarily too, because we didn't cover this, but see if you can answer the question anyways. What is the relationship between knowing God and his character and trusting him in the face of trials? And I want you to think in the line of Daniel being thrown in the lion's den. Even if you know, we didn't go over it. If you know the story a little bit, what did Daniel do in the middle of that? He trusted his God. Why is it important to know the attributes of your God, or to know who he is before you can come to the place of trusting him? How do you know that you can trust? Yeah. If you don't know that he has power to stop the lion's mouth, if he has power to overcome your enemies, you really aren't going to feel like you have any hope at all, right? Again, this is not what we covered because we're out of time, but after the decree was made that the king told them that they were to only pray to him for 30 days, what does Daniel do? He keeps praying 3 times a day. In what way should your prayer life then reflect Daniel's? Should you do 3 times a day? You could. Is there a command in the Bible that says 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night, you should pray? In fact, the Bible says to always pray. Pray without ceasing. But the idea is that our prayer life shouldn't be a last resort for trouble. Do you understand that? Daniel, it says he did that as he had always done. He didn't just and the fact it also says he didn't do it secretly either. He opened the window so everybody could hear him praying. He didn't care what the law said. He was still going to do what he was supposed to do. And so there's this attitude that maybe when you remember is that prayer shouldn't be a last resort. It should be something we're doing all the time. And no matter what comes, we should be praying. Right? Okay? All right. Let's see. Let me give you some other ones. As we've talked about Daniel these last few weeks, we have seen several different kings that have responded in various ways. What lessons can you learn from these kings? Huh? Don't try to exalt yourself. What happens with self-exaltation? Pride comes before destruction. Haughty spirit before a fall. Yeah. Okay. Any others? Should learn from your history. That's a good one. Belshazzar should have learned from his grandfather's history, right? Or great-grandfather or whatever's history. By the way, did you notice that every one of these kings up to this point have tried to act like they are God in some way? Nebuchadnezzar, you're going to bow down to my statue whether you want to or not, and what God can take you out of my hand. Remember that with the 3 Hebrew children or those kinds of things, and even Belshazzar acting somewhat like that. The Medes and the Persians, Darius does that. You're going to pray to me for 30 days. All right? There's that attitude that they don't seem to, they all have this kind of blatant arrogance about themselves. All right, and then last one. How does the account of Daniel point us toward Christ? You saw some of that today. How does it point us toward Christ? Okay. So God showed the vision to Daniel about his kingdom, and yeah. Yeah, about half of the book of Daniel is prophecy. Well, I'd say more than half of it is prophecy, because there's prophecy within the narrations of some of it. But you get actually just a straight prophecy. A lot of it has to do with the timing of Christ and his kingdom and how it's going to work in the world. The whole book of Daniel is really, in some sense, a book about Jesus Christ coming. And that judgment, the judgment that Judah was facing did not alter God's plan. Did not stop what God was intending to do. Right? Isn't that an amazing thing too? Is that God doesn't get stopped by men's sinful heart. He still accomplishes his purposes regardless of how things play out in our lives because of our sin. Yeah. So whether you do good or don't, whether you're faithful or not, he's still going to accomplish his purposes in our lives too, right? And in this world. Christ is always the focus of God's plan, right? For history, it was God bringing Jesus into the world, and what is it now? Well, but that's not really dependent on anything. You realize that, right? We're not waiting for something to happen. Jesus said it can come at any hour, any time he can come. So we're not waiting on any point in history, any events to happen in human history. So nothing's that way is dependent. But what is he working at now, presently? Building his kingdom. Seeing people be saved, one person at a time, right? And then one day the King of all kings will come, and that kingdom will be revealed for what it really is. No longer an invisible spiritual kingdom that only God himself knows and sees, but the true, the righteous, and the unrighteous will be revealed for what they are in that day, won't they? Yeah. bring the Messiah into the world. Yeah. Yep. We don't realize it until it's all over with, that he was working all the way through it. It's an amazing thing about the way God works. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and pray. I actually asked Brother Wayne, will you pray for us as we close, and we'll be back at 15 after.